"Run if you want, but I'll find you," Mafia boss said before kissing her tears away. The neon sign above Joe's Diner flickered with a rhythmic, electric buzz that Emma Hale had learned to tune out 3 years ago. It was 11:15 on a Tuesday night, and the smell of stale coffee and fryer grease clung to her uniform like a second skin. Emma wiped down the counter, her movements mechanical, while her mind replayed the voicemail her mother had left 2 hours ago. It was another complaint about her father, another demand for emotional support that Emma did not have the energy to give, and a vague insinuation that she needed money for a car repair. Emma paused, pressing the heel of her hand against her forehead. She was 26 years old, and her life felt like a math equation that refused to balance. Her rent was due in 4 days, and she was short by $300. Her student loans from the nursing program were looming over her head like storm clouds, and her tips from tonight barely covered the cost of her bus fare home and a sandwich. She was tired. It was a bone-deep spiritual exhaustion that made her limbs feel heavy and her patience thin. She tossed the rag into the sanitizer bucket and looked at the clock. 15 minutes until closing. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Emma suppressed a sigh and looked up, pasting on her customer service smile, but the expression faltered before it fully formed. 4 men walked in. They were not the usual late-night crowd of truckers or college students looking for cheap fries. These men wore suits that cost more than Emma made in a year. The fabric was dark, tailored, and absorbed the dim light of the diner rather than reflecting it. They moved with a synchronized silence, a predatory grace that immediately sucked the oxygen out of the room. The dishwasher in the back stopped clattering plates. The 2 truck drivers in the corner booth suddenly found the contents of their mugs incredibly fascinating, refusing to look up. Emma watched them. 3 of the men were clearly muscle, broad shoulders, eyes scanning the exits, hands hovering near their waistbands, but they were satellites orbiting the 4th man. He was tall, with hair the color of midnight and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He walked with a casual, terrifying confidence, as if he owned the ground beneath his feet and perhaps the air everyone else was breathing. He slid into a booth near the window, and the other 3 took up positions around him, effectively walling him off from the rest of the room. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat and grabbed a notepad. She walked over to the table, forcing her legs to move steady and slow. "Coffee. Black," the man said. His voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling in a garage. He did not look at the menu. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and entirely devoid of warmth. They swept over her face, cataloging her in a second. The fatigue under her eyes, the frayed collar of her uniform, the way she held her pen. It wasn't a look of desire. It was an assessment of threats, and he had dismissed her as harmless in a heartbeat. "Coming right up," Emma said. Her voice sounded thin in the quiet diner. She fetched the coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured it. When she set the cup down, he didn't say thank you. He just stared out the window at the dark parking lot, his hand resting on the table. She noticed a heavy silver ring on his pinky finger and a scar running along his knuckles. They stayed for 10 minutes. The man drank half the coffee, dropped a $20 bill on the table, and stood up. The satellites moved instantly, flanking him as they headed for the door. "Keep the change," one of the bodyguards muttered as they passed her. Emma let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since they walked in. She went to the table to clear the cup, gripping the $20 bill. It was crisp, brand new, outside. The heavy roar of engines started up. Emma turned back toward the kitchen to tell the cook they were officially closed when the sound shattered the night. Crack, crack, crack. It was distinct and unmistakable. Gunshots. Emma froze. The cook ducked behind the pass-through window. The truck drivers hit the floor. For a second, self-preservation screamed at her to dive behind the counter, to hide, to stay safe. But then she heard a shout, a raw, guttural sound of pain, followed by the screech of tires peeling away. Her nursing training kicked in before her common sense could stop it. Anatomy, physiology, triage protocols, they flooded her brain, pushing aside the fear. Someone was hurt. Emma ran to the door and shoved it open, the bell jingling cheerfully in contrast to the horror outside. The parking lot was dimly lit by a flickering street lamp. A black sedan was idling with its back door open, and a man was shouting into a phone, pacing frantically. Slumped against the rear tire of the car was the man in the dark suit. He was clutching his side, his expensive jacket slick with something dark and wet. Emma sprinted across the asphalt. The bodyguard on the phone spun around, reaching for a weapon inside his jacket, but Emma ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside the man on the ground. "Don't shoot me. I'm a nurse," she snapped. Though she was technically still a student, the man on the ground, Nico, though she didn't know his name yet, looked up at her. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead, but his eyes were lucid. He was grinding his teeth against the pain. "Let me see," Emma commanded. Her hands were steady now. The trembling was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. She pushed his hands aside. He resisted for a fraction of a second, his grip surprisingly strong. Before he relented, Emma pulled back the jacket. The white dress shirt underneath was soaked red. There was a bullet wound just above his hip bone. It was bleeding heavily, a dark, steady flow that meant a vein had been hit. Or worse. "Give me your jacket," Emma yelled at the bodyguard who was still screaming at someone on the phone. The man blinked at her, stunned by her tone. "Now," Emma shouted. The bodyguard scrambled to take off his suit jacket and handed it to her. Emma bunched the fabric up into a thick pad and pressed it directly onto the wound. The man on the ground hissed, his back arching against the tire. I know it hurts," Emma said, leaning her entire body weight onto her hands to apply maximum pressure. "Keep breathing. Look at me. Don't close your eyes." He looked at her. In the chaos of the parking lot, with the smell of gunpowder and copper filling the air, the world narrowed down to the two of them. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt physical. He wasn't panicking. He was studying her, watching the way her lips moved as she counted his respirations, watching the determination in her face. "Who are you?" he gritted out. His voice strained. "Emma Hale," she said automatically. "Keep your eyes open. Stay with me." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. The bodyguard finally hung up the phone. "Boss, we have to go," the bodyguard said, panic edging into his voice. "The cops are 2 minutes out. We have to get you to the dock." "No," Emma said, not looking up. "You move him now. He bleeds out in the car. The ambulance is coming." "We can't wait for an ambulance," the bodyguard argued, reaching down to grab the wounded man's arm. "We can't be here when the cops show up." "Stop," Emma barked. She shifted her weight, placing herself physically between the bodyguard and the wounded man's injury. "He has lost too much blood. If you move him without stabilizing the pressure, he will go into shock and cardiac arrest before you get 5 blocks. Do you want him to die in your back seat?" The bodyguard froze, torn between his orders and her terrifying certainty. He looked down at his boss. The wounded man was still staring at Emma. He gave a microscopic nod. "Leave us," the man whispered to his bodyguard. "Boss, go. Clear the scene." The bodyguard hesitated, looked at the sirens flashing blue lights against the distant buildings, and then swore. He jumped into the driver's seat of the sedan. The car screeched away, leaving Emma alone in the parking lot with a man who was bleeding out on the pavement. She didn't let up the pressure. Her arms were shaking from the exertion. "You are stubborn," the man murmured. His eyelids were drooping. "And you are losing consciousness," Emma said. "Talk to me. Tell me something boring. What is your favorite color?" He let out a dry, wheezing chuckle that ended in a groan. "I don't have one. Everyone has one," she said, her voice tight. "Pick one." "Red," he whispered. Looking at her hands covering his wound, the ambulance screeched into the lot, followed by 2 police cruisers. Paramedics swarmed them. Strong hands pulled Emma away. She stumbled back, gasping for air. She watched as they cut open his shirt, started an IV line, and loaded him onto the stretcher. Just before they lifted him into the back of the rig, he turned his head. His eyes found her, standing in the dark, her uniform stained with his blood. He didn't speak, but the look he gave her, searing, possessive, confused, burned itself into her memory. An hour later, Emma stood in the bathroom of the sprawling Riverton General Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing glare. She was standing at the sink, scrubbing her arms with pink industrial soap. The water swirling down the drain was tinted red. She was trembling again. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her hollow and cold. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair had escaped its bun, hanging in messy strands around her face. Her eyes looked wide and haunted. She had just saved a man's life, a man who clearly belonged to a world she wanted no part of, a man whose friends carried guns and ran from the police. "I did the right thing," she whispered to the empty room. It was the nurse's oath. You help. You don't judge. You just help. But as she dried her hands on a rough paper towel, she couldn't shake the sensation of his hand on her wrist. When she had first applied the pressure, he had reached out, his fingers curling weakly around her forearm. It hadn't been an act of aggression. It had been an anchor, a desperate attempt to hold on to something solid while the world spun away. Her heart raced just thinking about it, not from fear, exactly, but from a strange, electric jolt that she had felt when their skin touched. She threw the paper towel in the trash and walked out. She refused to give the police a statement other than what she saw, a drive-by shooting, a victim she didn't know. She refused a ride home. She took the bus, sitting in the back, hugging her arms to her chest, hoping she would never see that man again. 3 days passed. Riverton returned to its gray, rainy normalcy. Emma went to her classes. She took a biology exam. She dodged 2 more calls from her mother and finally picked up the 3rd one. Listening to 20 minutes of complaints about her father's new girlfriend, she went to work at the diner. It was early afternoon, the lunch rush just ending. The sun was trying to break through the cloud cover, casting weak beams of light across the checkered floor. Emma was clearing a table near the door when the atmosphere in the room changed. It was the same as before. A sudden drop in volume, a stillness that rippled outward from the entrance. Emma turned slowly, clutching a tray of dirty dishes against her chest like a shield. He was standing there. He looked different. He was wearing a long, camel-colored wool coat over a charcoal turtleneck. He was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly styled. He looked healthier, though there was a lingering pallor beneath his tan skin. And he moved with a slight stiffness that only a trained eye would notice. He was alone this time. He spotted her instantly. He didn't wait to be seated. He walked straight toward her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the linoleum. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She set the tray down on a nearby table because her hands were suddenly too weak to hold it. "You came back," she said. It wasn't a question. Nico DeLuca stopped 2 feet away from her, up close. He was devastating. The harsh lighting of the diner usually washed people out, but it only seemed to sharpen his features. He was too big for the space, too intense, too dangerous. "I needed to find the waitress who saved me," he said. His voice was just as low as she remembered, but without the strain of pain. "I was just doing my job," Emma said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Or, well, what I'm training to do." "You stayed," he said. "My men left. You stayed. You would have died if I left." "Yes," he said simply. "I would have." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Emma flinched, instinctively stepping back. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he registered her fear. He moved slower this time, withdrawing a thick, creamy white envelope. He held it out to her. "There is $10,000 in here," he said. "Consider it a down payment on my gratitude." Emma stared at the envelope. $10,000. That was her tuition for the next 2 semesters. That was her rent for a year. That was freedom from the crushing weight that sat on her chest every morning when she woke up. She looked at the money, and then she looked at his face. She saw the expectation there. He was a man who understood transactions. You do a service. You get paid. You save a life. You get a reward. It was clean. It was simple. It made her feel cheap. "No," Emma said. Nico blinked. "Excuse me? I said no," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't help you for money. I helped you because you were bleeding on the pavement. Keep your money." He frowned, genuinely perplexed. "You are a waitress. You have loans." "I checked." Emma bristled. "You checked? You investigated me?" "I make it my business to know who I am dealing with," he said, his tone turning cooler. "Take the money, Emma. It is not a bribe. It is a gift." "I don't want your gift," she said, crossing her arms. "And I don't want you looking into my life. Please, just go. Be alive. That's thanks enough." He stood there for a long moment, the envelope suspended between them. He looked at her with a renewed interest, a curiosity that was far more dangerous than his indifference. Slowly, he lowered his hand and tucked the envelope back into his coat. "You are a rare woman." "Emma Hale," he said softly. He turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Emma felt jittery, like she had consumed too much caffeine. Every time the door opened, she jumped. She clocked out at 10 at night. The air outside was crisp and cold, smelling of rain and exhaust. Emma wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself and started the walk to her apartment. It was only 6 blocks, but the streets were dark, the streetlights spaced too far apart. She had walked this route 1,000 times, but tonight felt different. The shadows seemed deeper. The silence felt heavy. She turned the corner onto 4th Street and heard footsteps behind her. Emma stopped. The footsteps stopped. She started walking again. Faster this time. The footsteps resumed, matching her pace. Panic rose in her throat, tasting like bile. She gripped her keys between her knuckles, a pitiful weapon against whatever was out there. She didn't look back. She just walked, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She was 2 blocks from home. If she ran, she could make it. She braced herself to sprint. Suddenly, a sleek black SUV pulled up alongside her, moving at a walking pace. The passenger window rolled down. Emma gasped and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the curb. The car stopped. The driver's door opened, and Nico stepped out. He wasn't wearing the camel coat anymore. He was in a dark suit, blending into the night. He walked around the hood of the car, his movement fluid despite his injury. "Get in the car," he said. Emma backed away, her hands raised. "Are you following me? Are you stalking me because I didn't take the money?" "I am not stalking you," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'm ensuring you do not get mugged on your way home. This is a bad neighborhood. I've lived here for 3 years," she snapped, though her voice wavered. "I don't need a chaperone." "Clearly, you do. Seeing as you were hyperventilating 10 seconds ago," he countered. He stopped a few feet from her. He was too close. The space between them crackled with tension. Emma could smell him. A mix of expensive, woodsy cologne, the sharp tang of antiseptic from his treated wound, and the scent of rain. It was an intoxicating, masculine smell that made her head spin. She looked up at him, intending to tell him to leave her alone, to tell him to go back to his world and leave her in hers. But the words died in her throat. He was looking down at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. It wasn't the cold assessment from the diner. It was something else, something possessive, something hungry. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Nico took 1 step closer. He invaded her personal space, his tall frame blocking out the streetlight, casting her in his shadow. He lowered his head until his mouth was inches from her ear. "I don't forget the people who saved my life," he said. His voice was a low vibration that she felt in her chest. It wasn't a thank you. It sounded like a vow. It sounded like a warning. Emma shivered. It was a reaction born of equal parts alarm and a terrifying, reluctant fascination. She wanted to run. She wanted to lean closer. She stood frozen on the curb, staring up at the man who was currently rewriting the laws of her gravity, and for the first time in her life. Emma Hale realized she was in absolutely over her head. Normalcy was a heavy blanket that Emma Hale tried to pull over her head, but it kept slipping off. For the next week, she tried to force her life back into the rigid, predictable shape it had held before the shooting. She went to her nursing classes and took copious notes on pharmacology, forcing her brain to focus on drug interactions instead of the memory of blood soaking into asphalt. She picked up extra shifts at the diner, smiling until her cheeks ached, pouring endless cups of coffee for truckers and students who never looked her in the eye. She answered her mother's phone calls, listening to the familiar litany of financial woes and emotional guilt trips, making the soothing noises required of a dutiful daughter. But the edges of her reality had frayed. It started with the black SUV. It was parked across the street from the diner on Tuesday morning. It was there again on Wednesday evening near the bus stop. It was a massive, silent vehicle with tinted windows that reflected the gray Riverton sky, giving away nothing of who sat inside. Then there were the men. Emma first noticed it on Thursday. She was refilling the sugar dispensers when she saw a man sitting in the corner booth, the one usually occupied by old Mr. Henderson and his crossword puzzles. This man was younger, wearing a leather jacket that cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. He had a thin white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He was drinking black coffee and reading a newspaper, but he never turned the page. His eyes were constantly flicking up, scanning the room, landing on Emma, and then moving to the door. She recognized him. He was the driver from the night of the shooting, the one who had shouted into the phone. A cold shiver crawled down her spine. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a liability, or an asset. She wasn't sure which was worse. She tried to ignore it. She told herself she was being paranoid, that Riverton was a big city and people crossed paths all the time. But deep down, she knew that men like that didn't just happen to crave Joe's Diner cherry pie. The illusion of safety shattered on Friday night. The diner was packed. It was the post-bar rush, a chaotic hour where the air smelled of grease, stale beer, and rain. The jukebox was blaring a country song that was too loud for the small space, and the noise level was a dull roar. Emma was exhausted. Her feet throbbed in her orthopedic shoes, and her patience was worn thin as paper. She was clearing a table near the front when a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Hey, sweetheart," a slur of a voice grumbled. "You ignored me." Emma stiffened. It was a man she had seen a few times before, a heavy-set guy with a flushed face and eyes glazed over with too much cheap whiskey. "I am sorry, sir," Emma said, trying to pull her hand back. Her voice was polite, practiced. "I did not hear you. What can I get for you?" "I want you to sit down," the drunk said, his grip tightening. His fingers were clammy and strong. "Just for a minute. You are too pretty to be working this hard." "Sir, please let go of my arm," Emma said, her voice dropping an octave. The politeness was slipping. "Don't be a bitch," he sneered, yanking her slightly off balance. The tray in her other hand rattled, silverware clattering dangerously. "I am just being nice." Panic flared in Emma's chest. The diner was full of people, but everyone seemed to be looking away, unwilling to get involved in a domestic squabble or a drunk's bad behavior. She looked around for the manager, but he was in the back office counting the till. "Let go," Emma said, louder this time. "Make me—" The drunk laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I would suggest you do as the lady says." The voice did not shout. It did not have to. It cut through the noise of the diner like a scalpel through silk, low, calm, and terrifyingly cold. The drunk froze. Emma looked up. Nico DeLuca was standing at the end of the booth. She hadn't seen him come in. She hadn't seen him sitting there. But he had been there, in the back booth, hidden in the shadows. He was wearing a dark gray suit, impeccable and sharp, contrasting violently with the worn vinyl of the diner seats. His hands were in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were zeroed in on the drunk's hand wrapped around Emma's wrist. "Who the hell are you?" the drunk blustered, though his confidence wavered as he looked up at Nico's height. Nico didn't blink. He took one step closer. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I am the man who is going to break your fingers, one by one. If you do not remove your hand from her arm in the next 1 second," Nico said. His tone was conversational, as if he were discussing the weather, which made the threat infinitely worse. The drunk looked at Nico's face, at the hard set of his jaw, the deadness in his eyes, and sobriety seemed to crash over him in an instant. He recognized a predator when he saw one. He released Emma as if she had burned him. "Sorry," the drunk stammered, scrambling out of the booth, knocking over his half-empty beer bottle. "Just a joke. Just having fun." Nico did not move. He just watched. The drunk backed away, stumbling over his own feet, and then turned and practically ran out the door, the bell jingling frantically behind him. The diner had gone silent. Emma stood there, rubbing her wrist, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Nico. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at her. "Break," he said softly. It wasn't a suggestion. Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She untied her apron with shaking hands and tossed it on the counter. She needed air. She needed to breathe. She pushed past him and headed for the back exit that led to the alley. She burst out into the cool night air, gasping. The alley was narrow, smelling of wet brick and dumpsters, but the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black. She leaned back against the brick wall, closing her eyes, trying to slow her racing heart. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind her. She opened her eyes. Nico was there. Didn't crowd her this time. He stood a few feet away, illuminated by the single yellow security light above the door. He looked out of place among the trash cans and puddles, like a panther pacing in a landfill. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "No, I am fine. He just, startled me. Let me see." He stepped into her space. Emma held her breath. Logic told her to step back, to go inside, to call the police, but her body didn't move. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was nothing like the drunk's. His fingers were warm, dry, and incredibly gentle. He turned her wrist over, inspecting the skin in the dim light. There were faint red marks where the customer had grabbed her, but no bruising yet. He ran his thumb over the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. The sensation was electric. His skin was rough, calloused, the hands of a man who worked or fought, but his touch was feather-light. "He's not going to come back," Nico said quietly, his eyes still on her wrist. "I know," Emma whispered. He looked up then, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her to the wall. The mask of the cold, unfeeling mob boss slipped for a fraction of a second. His eyes were dark pools of worry, swirling with something else. Anger, perhaps, that she had been touched at all. He stepped closer. He was so close now that his breath ghosted against her temple, warm and smelling faintly of espresso. He was tall enough that she had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. "Are you afraid of me, Emma?" he asked. The question hung in the damp air between them. Emma looked at him. She saw the sharp line of his jaw, the scar on his knuckle, the way his expensive suit fit his broad shoulders. She saw the violence he carried with him like a concealed weapon. But she also remembered his hand curling around hers in the parking lot, holding on for dear life. She remembered the way he had looked at her wound, angry that she was hurt. "No," she said, the truth tumbling out before she could check it. "I am not afraid of you." He frowned slightly, surprised. "Then why do you tremble?" "I am afraid of what follows you," she admitted. "I am afraid of the guns, the blood, the men in suits who watch me from across the street. I am afraid of the world you live in." "Nico." The honesty seemed to strike him. His expression hardened, but he didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned in. His chest brushed against her shoulder, a wall of solid heat. Emma felt a pull in her gut, a magnetic urge to close the remaining inch of distance and step into him. It was insane. It was dangerous. But the safety she felt standing in his shadow was intoxicating. "You should be," he murmured, his voice rough. "It is a bad world. Then why are you here?" she breathed. "Because I cannot seem to stay away." The door to the diner banged open, breaking the spell. The cook stuck his head out, holding a cigarette. He froze when he saw them. Emma pressed against the wall, the dark-suited man looming over her. "Everything okay?" "Emma?" the cook asked, eyeing Nico suspiciously. Emma blinked, the moment shattering. She stepped sideways, putting distance between herself and Nico. The loss of his warmth was immediate and jarring. "I am fine. Jerry," she said, her voice shaking only a little. "Just getting some air." Nico stepped back, his face smoothing instantly into that impenetrable mask. He nodded once to the cook, then looked at Emma. "Get home safe, Emma." He turned and walked down the alley, disappearing into the shadows as if he had been made of them. The warning came 2 days later. Emma was leaving her night class, her backpack heavy with textbooks. The campus was quiet, the streetlights humming overhead. "Miss Hale." She turned. It was the man with the scar, the one from the diner, the one from the shooting, Marco. He was leaning against a brick wall, smoking a cigarette. He didn't look threatening. Exactly, but he didn't look friendly either. He looked like a man who solved problems. Emma gripped her bag straps. "What do you want? Just a friendly word," Marco said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his boot heel. "People are asking questions." "What people?" "Bad people," Marco said vaguely. "They want to know who was in the parking lot that night, who helped the boss. You might want to be careful who you talk to. You might want to vary your route home." Emma felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "I didn't ask for this." She said, "I just helped a dying man." Marco looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I know. That is the problem. In this town, no good deed goes unpunished. You tied yourself to him when you put your hands on that wound. Now you are in the blast radius." He pushed off the wall and started to walk away. "Wait," Emma called out. "Is he okay?" Marco paused. He looked back over his shoulder, a dry smile touching his lips. He's breathing. That is usually enough for him. But he is distracted. And that is dangerous for everyone. He left her standing there, the weight of his words pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't keep it inside anymore. She needed to tell someone, or she was going to scream. Emma sat on the worn velvet couch in Lily's apartment, a mug of cheap wine in her hand. Lily was her best friend, a graphic designer with pink hair and a cynical view of the male population that rivaled Emma's own. "So, let me get this straight," Lily said, her eyes wide. "You saved a mobster. He offered you 10 grand. You said no. And now he is showing up at your work and scaring off drunks?" Emma groaned, burying her face in her hands. "When you say it like that, it sounds insane." "It sounds like the plot of a movie I would watch," Lily said, taking a sip of wine. "But in real life, Emma, this is terrifying." "I know," Emma said, her voice muffled. "I know it is. Marco, his guy, told me people are asking questions. I feel like I'm walking around with a target on my back." "But," Lily prompted. Emma looked up. "But what? But you are not telling me to call the police. You are not talking about moving to Alaska. You are talking about him, the way he looks, the way he smells." "I am not," Emma protested weakly. "You said he smelled like rain and authority." "Emma, that is direct quote." Lily smirked, but her eyes were serious. "You like him. I don't like him. He is a criminal. He is everything I don't want. Attraction is not logical." Lily said, her tone softening, "it is chemical. And clearly, the chemistry is there, but listen to me. Seriously, men like that, they are like hurricanes. They might be beautiful to look at, but they destroy everything they touch. Nothing good comes from a man shrouded in that much danger." "I know," Emma whispered. "I know." 3 days later, Emma came home to find her mail scattered on the floor of her small hallway. She sifted through it with a heavy heart. Junk mail, flyer for pizza, and the electric bill. She'd been dreading this one. She had left the heater on too much during the cold snap, and she knew she didn't have the money in her account to cover it. She was going to have to call and beg for an extension again. She tore open the envelope, bracing herself for the red ink. She stopped. The balance due was $0. Frowning, she looked closer. There was no receipt stapled to it, just a small, thick card made of expensive paper stock that had been slipped inside the envelope. She pulled it out. On the card, written in a sharp, masculine, architectural scrawl, were 2 words, handled, N. Emma stared at the card. Her first reaction was relief, a wave of it so strong it almost buckled her knees. The lights wouldn't be turned off. She could buy groceries this week. But then the relief curdled into something hot and sharp. Anger. He had been in her mail, or he had accessed her accounts. He had paid her bill without asking, without permission. It was a gesture of dominance. It was him saying, "I see your struggles, and they are trivial to me. I can fix your life with pocket change. It underscored the massive, gaping power imbalance between them. He was a king moving pawns. She was just a waitress trying to survive. She grabbed her coat. She wasn't going to let this slide. She waited until the diner was closed. She knew he would be there. He had been there every night for the past week, sitting in the back, watching. The lights were dimmed. The other waitress had left. The cook was out back smoking. Emma walked up to the booth where Nico sat. He was looking at a file on his phone, a half-empty espresso in front of him. She slammed the envelope and the card down on the table. Nico looked up slowly. He didn't flinch. He just looked at the envelope, then at her face. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. "Yes." "There is a problem," Emma said, her voice shaking with rage. "You paid my electric bill." "I did." He agreed. "I didn't ask you to do that. You needed it done." "That is not the point," Emma cried, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "You can't just handle my life, Nico. I am not one of your employees. I am not a charity case. You don't get to swoop in and fix things just because you can." Nico set his phone down. He slid out of the booth and stood up. Emma had to tilt her head back to look at him. He seemed to take up all the air in the room. "It is $200. Emma," he said dismissively, "it means nothing to me. It means my dignity to me," she shot back. "You are trying to own me. You think if you pay enough bills, if you scare off enough drunks, I will belong to you." "No," he said, his voice dropping, turning darker. "I think that you are exhausted. I think you are working yourself into the ground, and I think that someone is watching you, and you are too busy worrying about the lights going out to notice the knife at your throat." Emma froze. "What?" "I told you people were asking questions," Nico said, stepping closer. "The Valentis know someone helped me. They are sniffing around. They are watching the diner. They are watching your apartment." Emma's anger faltered, replaced by a spike of fear. "Then why are you adding to it? Why are you paying my bills? Because I cannot protect you if you are freezing in the dark," Nico snapped. The control in his voice fractured, revealing a jagged edge of personal worry. He stepped into her space. Backing her up, Emma took a step back, then another, until her lower back hit the laminated counter. She was trapped. Nico didn't stop until he was inches away. He was breathing hard, his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his temper in check. "I am not trying to own you. Emma," he grated out, "I am trying to keep you alive. Do you understand? I am trying to make sure that the choice you made to save my life does not end yours." Emma stared up at him, her chest heaving. Her anger was still there, but it was mixing with something else now, something hot and heavy that settled low in her stomach. Her cheeks flushed. Her eyes were bright with frustration and unshed tears. She looked defiant and terrified and beautiful. Nico looked at her mouth. His gaze was heavy, tactile. The air between them grew thick, charged with a sudden, suffocating desire. It wasn't logical. It wasn't safe. But it was there, undeniable as gravity. Nico raised his hand. Emma's breath hitched. She thought he was going to touch her face. She wanted him to touch her face, but he didn't. He braced his hand against the counter, right next to her hip. He didn't touch her. He just caged her in. His arm was a solid bar of heat next to her body. He leaned down, his face so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. The moment stretched, tense and magnetic. He wanted to kiss her. She could feel it radiating off him like heat from a fire, and God help her. She wanted to let him, but he didn't cross the line. He held himself back with a visible effort, his muscles tight as coiled wire. "Keep the money, Emma," he whispered, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Consider it hazard pay." He pushed himself off the counter and walked away, leaving her trembling in the quiet diner. The scent of him clinging to her uniform and the ghost of his touch burning on her skin where he hadn't even touched her. The lock on her apartment door was not broken. It was simply unlocked. Emma Hale stood in the hallway of her building, her hand hovering over the doorknob, her heart performing a slow, terrified thud against her ribs. She knew she had locked it. She had a ritual. Keys in purse, check the knob, jiggle it twice. She had done it this morning before heading to the diner for the lunch shift. Now, at 10 in the evening, the door was unlatched. She pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silence of the fourth-floor walk-up. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice was thin, trembling. Silence greeted her. The apartment smelled the same: vanilla candle wax, old books, and the lingering scent of her toast from breakfast. Nothing was overturned. Her television was still on its stand. Her laptop was still on the coffee table. Emma stepped inside, clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. She moved through the small living room, checking the corners, her breath coming in shallow gasps. It felt wrong. The air felt disturbed, as if someone had walked through it moments ago. She walked into her bedroom. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her dresser drawers were closed. Her jewelry box was untouched. But on her bed, right in the center of her white pillowcase, was a single object, a bullet. It was upright, balanced perfectly in the center of the fluff, gleaming dull gold in the light from the hallway. It was a message. It was a promise. Emma backed away, her hand clapping over her mouth to stifle a sob. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared at that small piece of metal that represented the end of her life as she knew it. The police were polite, bored, and ultimately useless. They filed a report for unlawful entry. They bagged the bullet as evidence, handling it with a casual indifference that made Emma want to scream. They told her that without signs of forced entry or theft, it was likely a prank. Maybe an ex-boyfriend, maybe a neighbor. They left after 20 minutes. Emma sat on her couch, wrapping her arms around herself. She felt cold, a deep, shivering chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She felt violated. Her sanctuary, the one place where she didn't have to be a waitress or a student or a daughter, had been breached. She jumped when a heavy knock sounded at the door. Before she could stand, the door opened. Nico DeLuca walked in. He took up the entire frame. He was wearing a black overcoat, the collar turned up, his face set in a mask of dark, terrifying fury. Behind him, she saw movement in the hallway, men in suits, moving silently, checking the stairs, securing the perimeter. Nico didn't look at the apartment. He looked straight at her. His eyes were wild, scanning her for injuries, for blood, for any sign that they had touched her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. His voice was low, vibrating with a suppressed violence that made the air in the room feel heavy. Emma shook her head, standing up slowly. "No, I am not hurt." Nico strode across the room. He didn't stop until he was standing in the doorway of her bedroom. He looked at the bed. The police had taken the bullet, but the indentation remained on the pillow. He stared at it for a long time, his hands, hanging by his sides, curled into fists so tight that the leather of his gloves creaked. He turned back to her. The mask slipped, just for a second, revealing a depth of guilt and torment that took Emma's breath away. "This is because of me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a confession. "They know who I am," Emma whispered. "They know where I live. The Valentis," Nico said, the name sounding like a curse. "They followed you. They broke in to show me that they can get to you whenever they want. They did not take anything because they wanted me to know that you are the only thing of value here." He walked over to her. He seemed larger in her small living room, a dark force of nature that made her IKEA furniture and thrift store lamps look fragile. "Pack a bag," he said. "What?" "Pack a bag. Emma, you are leaving." "Now, I can't just leave," she protested, though the fight was weak in her voice. "I have class tomorrow. I have work. My lease." "None of that matters," Nico snapped. His voice cracked like a whip, making her flinch. He saw the fear in her eyes and closed his eyes for a second, exhaling sharply through his nose. When he opened them, the anger was dialed back, replaced by a desperate intensity. "Emma, listen to me. A bullet on a pillow is not a threat. It is a countdown. If you stay here tonight, you will be dead by morning. They are waiting for me to leave so they can finish the job." Emma looked around her apartment. It was small. It was drafty. But it was hers. And now it was a trap. She was trembling again, her legs feeling like they might give out. The reality of the bullet, the cold metal against her soft pillow, finally crashed down on her. "Okay," she whispered. She went to the bedroom and threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. Jeans, her nursing scrubs, a few t-shirts. She didn't know how long she would be gone. She didn't know if she would ever come back. When she came out, Nico was waiting by the door. He took the bag from her without a word. She hesitated, looking back at her living room one last time. Nico reached out. He didn't grab her arm. He placed his hand gently at the small of her back. The touch was firm, warm through the fabric of her sweater. It wasn't possessive, it was grounding. It was a silent signal that he was there, that he was solid, and that he would not let her fall. "Let's go," he said softly. He guided her out of the apartment, past the grim-faced men guarding the hallway, and down the stairs to the waiting convoy of black SUVs. The penthouse was a world away from Riverton. It sat atop one of the tallest steel spires in the city, a fortress of glass and limestone that looked down on the grid of streets below. The elevator ride had been silent, tense. When the doors opened, Emma stepped into a space that was beautiful, cold and utterly surreal. The floors were polished marble. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city skyline like a piece of expensive art. The furniture was modern, low and white. There were no knickknacks, no photos, no signs of life. It felt like a museum exhibit, or a cage. "Make yourself at home," Nico said, dropping her bag on a leather bench. "The guest room is down the hall to the right. The master is on the left. The kitchen is fully stocked." Emma stood in the center of the massive living room, wrapping her arms around herself. She felt small here. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Sometimes," Nico said. He was taking off his coat, revealing the shoulder holster he wore over his dress shirt. He unclipped it and set it on the console table with a casual familiarity that made Emma's stomach turn. "It is secure, reinforced glass, private elevator, 24-hour security in the lobby. You are safe here." "Safe," Emma repeated hollowly. She walked to the window. The cars below were just streaks of red and white light. From up here, the city looked peaceful. It was a lie. "Go get some sleep." "Emma," Nico said. His voice was tired. "We will figure out the rest in the morning." She didn't think she would sleep. The bed in the guest room was massive, the sheets made of silk that felt like cool water against her skin. It was the most comfortable bed she had ever lain in, and she hated it. She tossed and turned for hours, listening to the silence of the penthouse. It was too quiet. She missed the sound of the radiator clanking in her apartment. She missed the sirens. When sleep finally took her, it was not kind. She was back in the parking lot, but this time, it wasn't Nico bleeding on the ground. It was her. She was trying to scream, but her mouth was full of blood. She looked up, and Nico was standing there, watching her, holding the bullet from her pillow. He offered it to her like a gift. Emma woke with a gasp. Sitting bolt upright, a cry tore from her throat before she could stop it, a jagged sound of pure terror. She was tangled in the sheets, sweat making her skin clammy. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Light spilled into the room from the hallway. Nico was there. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms corded with tension. He looked exhausted, shadows bruising the skin under his eyes. "Emma?" he said, his voice rough with alarm. He stepped into the room. He hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to comfort and the need to keep his distance. But when he saw her face, wet with tears, pale with shock, the hesitation vanished. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Hey," he said softly. "You are okay. You are here." Emma looked at him, and the dam broke. The fear she had been holding back since she saw the bullet, the stress of the last week, the exhaustion, it all came crashing down. "I can't do this," she sobbed, her voice breaking. She collapsed forward. Nico caught her. Emma buried her face in his chest. The fabric of his shirt was crisp, smelling of starch and that woodsy cologne that seemed to cling to him. She grabbed handfuls of his shirt, clinging to him as if he were a raft in a storm. "They are going to kill me," she cried, her words muffled against his sternum. "They were in my room." Nico, they touched my pillow. I am just a waitress. I don't know how to do this. I am losing my mind. Shh, Nico murmured. He wrapped his arms around her. One hand circled her waist, pulling her flesh against him. The other hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers threading through her tangled hair. He held her tightly, an immovable object absorbing the force of her breakdown. I have you, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. I have you, Emma. Nobody touches you. I will burn this city to the ground before I let them touch you again. He held her while she cried, rocking her slightly. She could feel the steady, heavy thud of his heart beneath her cheek. It was a slow, powerful rhythm that gradually coaxed her own racing heart to slow down. The tears began to subside, leaving her drained and shaky. She stayed there, resting against him, listening to him breathe. Slowly, Emma pulled back. She kept her hands on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. Her face was inches from his. Nico looked at her. His eyes were dark, searching hers with an intensity that burned. He lifted one hand and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a stray tear. The movement was incredibly tender, at odds with the violence she knew he was capable of. You are safe, he whispered. Emma looked at him. She saw the lines of fatigue around his mouth, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. She felt the strength of his arms around her, and in that quiet, shadowed room, the fear morphed into something else. It was a pull, a gravity, a desperate need to feel something other than terror. Her gaze dropped to his mouth. Nico saw it. His pupils dilated, his hand on her waist tightened, his fingers digging into the fabric of the oversized shirt she was wearing. His shirt. He didn't move. He waited. He gave her the choice. Emma leaned in. She closed the small distance between them and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was slow and desperate and heavy with unspoken things. Nico made a low sound in his throat, a groan of surrender. He didn't pull away. He kissed her back. He cupped her face with both hands, tilting her head back to deepen the contact. His lips were firm, warm, and demanding. Emma gasped, opening to him, and the kiss changed. It became heated, a sudden flare of passion that scorched through the sadness and the fear. Emma moved her hands up his chest, gripping his shoulders. She pulled him closer, needing to feel the weight of him, the reality of him. Her fingers dug into the hard muscle, grounding herself. Nico shifted, angling his body to align with hers. He was careful, so careful, treating her like she was made of glass even as he devoured her. His tongue swept against hers, tasting of coffee and mint. It was a kiss that tasted of danger and safety all at once. They clung to each other in the dim light, two people from different worlds colliding in the center of a storm. For a moment, there were no Valentis, no bullets, no nursing school. There was just the heat of his skin, the roughness of his hands, and the desperate beat of their hearts. Emma felt a fire ignite in her belly, a longing so sharp it frightened her. She pressed closer, wanting to crawl inside his skin, wanting to forget everything else. And then, panic flickered. She realized what she was doing. She was kissing a crime boss. She was falling for the danger she had sworn to avoid. She pulled back, breaking the kiss with a sharp intake of breath. They stared at each other, chests heaving. Nico's lips were swollen, his eyes blown wide and black with desire. His hands were still framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. Emma trembled. I shouldn't want this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Not with you, not like this. Nico closed his eyes for a moment, resting his forehead against hers. He took a ragged breath. I know, he rasped. You are everything I am afraid of, she said, tears threatening to fall again. I know, he repeated. He opened his eyes and looked at her. The desire was still there, burning hot, but behind it was a steel wall of restraint. I have been trying not to cross this line. Emma, he said, his voice rough, because I am not a good man. I am selfish. Once I cross this line, I do not let go easily. If I start this, I will not be able to stop, and I do not want to destroy you. Emma stared at him, her heart aching. The confession hung in the air. He wasn't rejecting her. He was warning her. He was protecting her from himself. It made her want him more, but Nico pulled his hands away. The loss of contact was physical, like a bandage being ripped off. He stood up, putting distance between them. He ran a hand through his hair, smoothing it back, trying to regain his composure. He looked down at her, sitting small and vulnerable in the center of his massive bed. "Sleep, Emma," he said. His voice was steady again, though the strain remained. "Where are you going?" she asked. "The couch," he said. "I will be right outside the door. You are safe here, even from me." He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Emma sat there in the silence, her lips still tingling from his kiss. She wrapped her arms around her knees and stared at the door. He had walked away, despite the heat, despite the way he had looked at her like a starving man looks at a feast. He had walked away to make sure she felt safe. It wasn't the lust that terrified her anymore. It was the realization that he cared enough to deny himself. It was the realization that his feelings ran deeper than a simple physical attraction. And as she laid back down on the silk pillows, Emma realized with a sinking heart that she was already in too deep to ever run fast enough to escape him. The morning sun that flooded the penthouse did not bring warmth. It brought a harsh, blinding clarity to the situation. Emma sat on a white leather bar stool in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of coffee that she had not taken a sip of in 20 minutes. Across the marble island, Nico was on his phone, his voice low and clipped, speaking a language that sounded like Italian mixed with military code. When he finally hung up, he turned to her. He was dressed in a fresh suit, navy blue today, and he looked every inch the corporate shark, except for the predatory way he moved and the gun she knew was tucked beneath his jacket. "We need to talk about why you are here," Nico said, setting his phone down on the counter. "I think the bullet on my pillow explained it pretty well," Emma said, her voice sounding scrapier than usual. "That was the message. This is the reason," he corrected. "The Valentis are a rival family. They have been trying to encroach on my territory in the shipping yards for 6 months. We have been at a stalemate. They need leverage." "And I am the leverage?" Emma asked. Nico nodded once. "They know you were there the night I was shot. They suspect you saw who the shooter was. Or, more likely, they simply saw how I reacted to you. They saw me return to the diner. They saw me put a car on you. They know that you matter." Emma felt a chill slide down her spine. "So I am a pawn." "No," Nico said sharply, stepping closer. "A pawn is sacrificed to save the king. You are not a pawn. Emma, you are the vault. You are the thing I am locking away because I cannot afford to lose it." The sentiment was meant to be protective, but it landed heavy on her chest. She looked away, toward the massive windows. Later that morning, the reality of her position became even starker. 3 men arrived at the penthouse, lieutenants, Emma assumed. Among them was Marco, the man with the scar who had warned her at her college. They gathered in the living room, standing in a tight circle with Nico. They kept their voices low, but the acoustics of the open concept space carried their words to where Emma sat, pretending to read a book. "This is a mistake. Nico," one of the men growled. He was older, with graying hair and a face like a bulldog. "We are locking down the entire operation for a civilian? A waitress? She's not just a civilian." Nico's voice cut through the air. "Icy and absolute. She is a liability," the man insisted. "The Valentius are squeezing our distribution routes because they know we are distracted. We should cut her loose. Put her on a bus to Ohio. If they find her, we have a business to run." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma gripped her book so hard the cover bent. Nico stepped into the older man's personal space. Emma watched his posture shift from relaxed to lethal in a heartbeat. "If you ever suggest sacrificing her again," Nico said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "you will not walk out of this room. Her safety is non-negotiable. Is that clear?" The older man swallowed, looking at Nico's eyes, and then nodded stiffly. "Crystal clear, boss." They dispersed shortly after, leaving a tension in the air that was thick enough to taste. Emma felt a complex knot of emotions in her stomach. On one hand, the ferocity of Nico's defense made her heart race. He was willing to go to war with his own men for her. On the other hand, the guilt was crushing. She was the reason for this chaos. She was the crack in his armor. When Nico came over to her, she stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "I need to go to work," she said. Nico stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me? I have a shift at 5, and I have a nursing seminar tomorrow morning. I can't just stop existing." "Nico, you are not going to work," he said, his tone flat. "You are not going to class. You are staying here where the glass is bulletproof and the doors are reinforced." "For how long?" Emma demanded. "A week? A month? Forever? As long as it takes to neutralize the threat. You are putting me in a cage," she cried, frustration boiling over. "I am keeping you alive," Nico shouted back, his composure cracking. "Do you not understand what they will do to you? They do not want to talk to you. Emma, they want to hurt you to make me bleed. I'm not replacing your freedom with a cage. I'm replacing your death with a fortress. It is the same thing if I can't leave," she argued. "I have a life. I have responsibilities. I am not a piece of gold you can just lock in a vault." "You are today," he said, turning away to check his watch. "I have a meeting with the council. Do not leave this apartment." He didn't wait for her response. He signaled to the guard stationed by the elevator, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. The heavy metal doors slid shut, sealing her in. Emma stood in the center of the luxury prison, shaking with anger. He was right about the danger. She knew that, but the suffocation was visceral. She felt like she was disappearing, her identity as Emma Hale, the nursing student, being erased and replaced by Emma Hale, the mob boss's weakness. She paced the apartment for an hour. She watched the city below. She felt the walls closing in. At 2 p.m, a catering delivery arrived. The elevator doors opened to reveal a young man pushing a cart of food supplies. The guard at the door, a man named Leo who had been eyeing his phone more than the hallway, stepped forward to check the cart. "Hey, you got the invoice for this?" Leo asked, distracted, flipping through a clipboard. The delivery boy fumbled with his pockets. "Yeah, hold on, it is here somewhere." Emma saw the opening. It was small, foolish, and reckless, but her need for air was overwhelming. While Leo was bending over the cart, arguing about a signature, Emma slipped her shoes off. She moved silently across the marble floor. The service elevator the delivery boy had used was still open, held by a doorstop. She didn't think. She just moved. She darted past the cart, her socks sliding on the floor, and slipped into the service car. She hit the button for the lobby. "Hey!" Leo shouted, but the doors were already closing. Emma jammed her feet back into her sneakers as the elevator plummeted 40 floors. Her heart was in her throat. When the doors opened in the loading dock, she ran. She burst out into the alleyway and didn't stop until she hit the main avenue. The noise of the city hit her like a physical blow. Car horns, the rumble of buses, the chatter of pedestrians. It was chaotic and dirty and loud, and Emma breathed it in like oxygen. She walked fast, keeping her head down. She didn't have a plan. She just needed to be Emma again, even for an hour. She blended into the crowd, a woman in a gray cardigan and jeans, invisible. She walked for blocks, letting the rhythm of the city soothe her frayed nerves. She bought a coffee from a street cart just to exchange words with a stranger who didn't know her name. She watched a mother pushing a stroller. She watched 2 teenagers arguing over a phone. Normalcy. It was right there, all around her, but she felt like a ghost passing through it. She didn't belong anymore. Every time a black car slowed down, she flinched. Every time a man in a suit passed her, her muscles coiled to run. Nico was right. The cage was not the penthouse. The cage was the fear he had awakened in her. Nico received the call while he was in the middle of a sit-down with 3 other territory bosses. His phone vibrated in his pocket. One look at the screen, a text from Leo, and his blood ran cold. She is gone. Rage, white-hot and blinding, flared in his chest, followed immediately by a sickening drop of terror. He stood up abruptly, interrupting a man who was discussing union dues. "This meeting is over," Nico said. He walked out, ignoring the confused protests behind him. He marched to his car, his mind racing. His first instinct was to flood the streets, send every soldier he had, tear the city apart block by block until he found her. But he stopped himself, his hand hovering over the door handle of his SUV. If he sent his men, it would draw attention. The Valentis would see the activity. They would know she was in the wind. He would be painting a target on her back. And if he hunted her down like a fugitive, dragging her back, kicking and screaming, he would lose her in a way that had nothing to do with bullets. He took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure app. When he had given her the phone back at the hospital, he had installed a tracker. He had told himself it was a precaution. Now, it was a lifeline. A small blue dot pulsed on the map. She was near the river. Nico got into the car. "I am driving," he told his driver. "Get out." He drove alone. He needed to do this himself. Emma stood by the railing at Riverside Park. It was a quiet stretch of green along the gray, churning water of the river. She used to come here to study for her anatomy exams because it was peaceful. Today, the wind was biting, whipping her hair across her face. She gripped the cold metal railing, her knuckles white. The rush of escaping had faded, leaving only a hollow ache. She looked at the water and realized she had nowhere to go. She couldn't go back to her apartment. She couldn't go to her mother's. She couldn't go to class. She was stranded between a life that was too dangerous to survive and a life that was too dangerous to leave. She heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn around. She knew who it was. She felt him. His presence was a heavy weight against her back, a shift in the air pressure. "You are hard to keep track of," Nico said. His voice wasn't angry. It sounded drained. Emma wiped a tear from her cheek before turning around. Nico was standing 10 feet away. He wasn't wearing his coat, just his suit jacket. The wind was ruffling his dark hair, making him look less like a statue and more like a man. He wasn't reaching for her. He was just standing there, waiting. "I can't breathe in that house." "Nico," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I know," he said. "You have to let me go," she pleaded, tears spilling over again. "I'm just a waitress. I am nobody. If you let me go, the Valentis won't care about me. I can move. I can change my name. I can disappear." "You can't," Nico said softly. He took a step closer. "You think you can, but you can't. They will find you. And even if they don't—" He stopped, his jaw working. The mask of the untouchable crime boss crumbled completely. His eyes were dark pools of torment. "I can't let you go," he admitted. "Why?" Emma cried. "Why do you care this much? I saved you one time. That doesn't mean you own me. It is not about owning you," Nico roared, the words tearing out of him. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He didn't grab her. He stopped inches from her, his hands hovering as if he were afraid to touch her, afraid he would break her. "It is about the fact that for 10 years I have been walking through a graveyard," Nico said, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. "I have been dead, Emma, cold, empty, and then you put your hands on me in that parking lot and you looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, I felt something other than hate." Emma stared at him, stunned into silence. "I am a control freak," he rasped. "I control the streets. I control the unions. I control who lives and who dies. But when I found out you were gone today, I lost it. The thought of losing you terrifies me more than any gun pointed at my head." He reached out then, unable to stop himself. He cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm against her wind-chilled skin. His thumbs brushed away the fresh tears tracking down her cheeks. "You want to leave?" he asked, searching her eyes. "You want to run?" "Yes," Emma whispered, though the word lacked conviction. "Then run," he murmured, leaning his forehead against hers. "Run if you want, but I'll find you." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise of violence. It was a broken confession. It was him telling her that no matter how far she went, his heart was already tethered to hers, and he would follow that line until the end of the world. Emma looked at him, this dangerous, broken man who was offering her the only thing he had left to give, his absolute devotion. She didn't run. She let out a shaky breath, her hands coming up to grip the lapels of his jacket. Nico. She breathed. He didn't wait. He tilted her head back and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the bedroom. That had been tentative, careful. This was raw. This was a claiming. He kissed the salt from her lips. He kissed the fear from her mouth. It started soft, a tender brushing of lips that apologized for the cage, for the danger, for the life he was dragging her into. But as Emma sighed and leaned into him, the tenderness ignited into something fiercer. Nico groaned low in his throat. His arms went around her, pulling her body flush against his. One hand slid up to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady. The other arm wrapped around her lower back, lifting her slightly, anchoring her to him. Emma melted. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a surge of heat that made her toes curl. She rose on her tiptoes, pressing herself against the hard wall of his chest. She opened her mouth to him, and he took the invitation, his tongue sweeping against hers in a rhythm that was ancient and desperate. The wind whipped around them, the river churned below, and the city watched from a distance. But in that small circle of warmth, there was only them. They clung to each other by the railing, bodies locked together. It felt like surrender. It felt like Emma was finally admitting that the safety she craved wasn't in a normal life, but in the arms of the man who would burn the world down to keep her warm. When they finally broke apart, breathless and dizzy, Nico didn't let her go. He kept his forehead pressed to hers, his eyes closed, his breathing harsh. "Don't run," he whispered against her lips. "Please, don't run." Emma opened her eyes. She looked at the sharp angles of his face, softened now by vulnerability. She traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "I'm not running," she whispered back. She wasn't running. She was staying, and God help them both. She was ready to fight. The silence in the penthouse was different now. It was no longer the stifling silence of a cage, but the quiet hum of a truce. When they returned from the river, the air between them had shifted. The desperate, wind-whipped kiss by the railing had broken down a wall that neither of them knew how to rebuild. Emma had agreed to stay, not as a prisoner, but as a partner in her own protection, in return. Nico had promised her the truth. It was a dangerous gift, the truth. Over the next few days, Emma began to see the machinery of Nico's world. He stopped hiding his phone calls. He left files open on the marble island in the kitchen. She saw the blueprints for a new community center in the Lower East Side, fully funded by a charitable trust that bore his mother's maiden name. She saw invoices for a legitimate construction firm that employed 200 people, many of them ex-convicts who couldn't get work anywhere else. But she also saw the shadow. She sat on the sofa one afternoon, pretending to read a medical journal, while Nico paced the living room, arguing in Italian with a man on speakerphone. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Lethal, uncompromising, violent. When he hung up, he rubbed his temples, his shoulders tight. "Trouble?" Emma asked quietly. "A dispute at the docks," Nico said, exhaling slowly. "One of my captains wants to send a message to a union rep who is stalling. He wants to break legs. And what do you want?" "I want the contract signed without blood on it," Nico said, looking at her. "We are negotiating." I told him to stand down. Emma watched him. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between the instinct for violence that had been bred into him and the desire for something cleaner that she had sparked. "You are changing things," she observed. "I am trying," he corrected. "It is like trying to turn an ocean liner with a canoe paddle, but I am trying." Their domestic life began to take on a strange, fragile rhythm. Emma stopped hiding in the guest room. She spent her evenings in the living room with him. They talked until late at night, the city lights glittering below them like a carpet of diamonds. She told him about her nursing rotations, about the first time she lost a patient, about her dream of working in pediatrics. He listened with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. In turn, he told her about his childhood, about the pressure of the family name, about the loneliness of a throne he never really wanted. One Tuesday evening, The tension that always hummed beneath the surface of their interactions broke in an unexpected way. Nico had dismissed the staff early. Emma found him in the sleek industrial kitchen, staring at a pot of boiling water with the same concentration he used to dismantle rival organizations. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, leaning against the doorframe. Nico looked up, startled. There was a smudge of white flour on his black dress shirt, right over his heart. "I am making carbonara," he announced with dignity. "You cook?" "My grandmother taught me. I have not done it in 10 years. But how hard can it be?" It turned out quite hard. The next hour was a comedy of errors that Emma would have never believed if she hadn't witnessed it. The pasta was nearly overcooked. The egg mixture was almost scrambled. At one point, Nico, the man who struck fear into the hearts of hardened criminals, cursed softly at a clove of garlic that refused to be crushed. "Here, let me—" Emma laughed, stepping in. She moved beside him, taking the knife. Their arms brushed. The laughter died in her throat. Nico went still. He watched her hands as she deftly chopped the garlic. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, shifting from playful to charged in a heartbeat. He reached out and took the knife from her hand, setting it on the counter. "You have flour on your nose," he murmured. He didn't wipe it off. Instead, he stepped into her space, backing her gently until her hips bumped the edge of the granite counter. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, trapping her, but not touching her. Emma looked up at him. His eyes were warm, lacking the icy edge she had seen so often. He looked younger, lighter. "Are you going to let the pasta burn?" she whispered. "Let it burn," he said. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, terrified kiss from the bedroom, nor the raw, claiming kiss from the river. It was easy. It was warm. It tasted of wine and promise. Emma hummed against his lips, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. He groaned low in his throat, his body pressing against hers, solid and heavy, for a few minutes amidst the smell of garlic and simmering water. They were just a man and a woman, finding solace in the simple act of being close. But the world outside the penthouse did not stop turning just because they had found a moment of peace. 2 nights later, a storm rolled into Riverton. Thunder rattled the reinforced glass of the windows, and rain lashed against the city in sheets of gray. The mood inside matched the weather. Nico had been tense all day. A message had come in early that morning, a shop owner in DeLuca territory. An old man who paid his protection money on time had been beaten within an inch of his life. The message left with him was simple. The girl for the peace. The Valentis were escalating. They weren't just watching anymore. They were demanding a trade. Emma stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, hugging her arms around herself. She wore a soft gray sweater that belonged to Nico. The sleeves hung past her fingertips. "You can't keep this up." "Nico," she said, her voice competing with the rumble of thunder. "They hurt that man because of me. They hurt him because they are animals," Nico said from behind her. He was pouring a drink, the crystal decanter clinking against the glass. "They want me," Emma said, turning to face him. "If I give myself up—" "Don't," Nico warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Do not even finish that sentence. I am tired of people bleeding for me," Emma cried. "I am tired of hiding up here while you go out there and risk a war. There is already a war. Emma." Nico set the glass down hard enough to crack the stem. "There has been a war since the day I was born. You just gave me something to fight for." He crossed the room, his stride eating up the distance between them. He stopped in front of her, his chest heaving with suppressed emotion. The lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp angles of his face, the torment in his eyes. "I don't know if I can trust this," Emma whispered, her anger dissolving into fear. "I don't know if I can trust a future with you. How do I know you won't wake up one day and decide the business is more important? How do I know I won't end up a widow at 30? You don't," Nico said roughly. "That is the risk." He reached out and took her by the waist, lifting her easily. He pressed her gently back against the cool glass of the window. The city lay below them, a grid of rain-blurred lights, a million lives continuing in ignorance of the drama playing out in the sky. Nico braced one hand against the glass above her head, leaning over her. His other hand stayed at her waist, his thumb rubbing soothing circles against the fabric of her sweater. "I cannot promise you safety," he admitted, his face inches from hers. "I can only promise you that as long as I have breath in my lungs, you will never be alone. I am trying to build a way out. Emma, for us." Emma looked at him, searching for the truth. She saw the fear he tried to hide, the fear that he wasn't good enough, that he was too stained by his past to deserve her. She reached up and touched his face. "Show me," she whispered. He kissed her then, and it was like the storm outside, powerful, electric, inevitable. He pressed her against the glass, his body shielding her from the view of the city, claiming her in the face of the lightning. It was a kiss that sealed a pact. They were in this together now, but while they stood in the safety of the penthouse, the foundation was crumbling beneath them. In the hallway outside the apartment, Leo, the young guard who had been on duty the day Emma tried to escape, was looking at his phone. A message blinked on the screen. "Tomorrow, the transport, Route B. Make sure the driver takes the tunnel." Leo's thumb hovered over the screen. He looked at the heavy door of the penthouse. He had been with the DeLuca family for 5 years, but the Valentis had offered him something Nico never could, a way out of the debt his gambling addiction had racked up, and a guarantee that his sister would be kept safe. He typed a single word, "Done." He slid the phone back into his pocket just as the door opened. Marco stepped out, looking grim. "Nico needs you on the morning detail," Marco said, eyeing Leo. "We are moving her. This location is compromised. Too many delivery trucks, too much traffic. We're taking her to the safe house in the countryside." "Understood," Leo said, keeping his face blank. Inside, Emma had walked past the open door of Nico's study a few minutes prior, intending to ask him about dinner. She had stopped when she heard Marco's voice. "You know this is suicide, boss," Marco was saying. "Trying to go legitimate? The commission won't like it." "I don't care what the commission likes," Nico had replied. "You tried this before." "Nico, remember 7 years ago? You tried to walk away, and I buried my brother because of it." Nico's voice was a harsh rasp. "I know. Marco, I remember every shovelful of dirt." Emma had frozen in the hallway. She hadn't known. She hadn't known that his obsession with control, his ruthless grip on his territory, was born from a failure to protect the people he loved. He wasn't a monster holding on to power. He was a traumatized man holding on to the only shield he had. She had walked away without saying anything, her heart aching with a new, profound empathy. That night, the storm passed, leaving the city washed clean and silent. Emma and Nico lay on top of the covers of the massive bed in the master bedroom. They were fully clothed. Nico had loosened his tie. Emma was wearing leggings and a soft t-shirt. They lay side by side, not touching, staring at the ceiling. "What does home mean to you?" Emma asked softly into the darkness. Nico was silent for a long time. "It used to mean the place where I kept my weapon," he said. "A fortress, a bunker, and now?" He turned his head on the pillow to look at her. In the dim light, his expression was unguarded, stripped of all the armor he wore for the world. "Now," he said, his voice rough with honesty, "it is wherever you are." Emma felt her throat tighten. She turned onto her side to face him. She reached out, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow. Nico closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into her hand. "We are going to figure this out," she promised him. "I know," he whispered. He opened his eyes and looked at her mouth. This time, there was no hesitation, no warning about crossing lines. The lines were gone. He shifted, pulling her toward him. Emma went willingly, sliding across the silk coverlet until she was pressed against his side. He wrapped his arm around her waist, anchoring her. They kissed slowly. It wasn't about heat or desire, though those things were there. It was a savoring. It was a quiet exploration of the connection that had tethered them together since that night in the parking lot. It was a kiss that said, "I see you and I chose you." Emma felt safe. For the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in her chest unraveled. She felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her ribs, and it lulled her. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day caught up with her. She rested her head on his shoulder, her arm thrown across his chest, her breathing evened out, deepening into sleep. Nico did not sleep. He lay there in the dark, listening to the rhythm of her breath, feeling the warmth of her body against his. He stared at the ceiling shadows, his mind a chessboard of moves and countermoves. He knew the Valentis were close. He knew he had a mole, only someone on the inside could have known about the shopkeeper. He knew that moving Emma tomorrow was a risk, but staying here was a death sentence. He tightened his arm around her waist, pulling her impossibly closer. He would get her to the safe house. He would tear the rat out of his organization. He would make peace, or he would make war. But he would not let her go. He closed his eyes, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years that he wasn't making a mistake. The morning brought a pale, watery sunlight and a flurry of activity. "Pack light," Nico told her. "We will have everything you need at the house." Emma packed a small bag. She felt a strange sense of foreboding, a prickle on the back of her neck that she couldn't shake. But she looked at Nico, checking the clip of his gun with efficient, calm movements, and she forced herself to breathe. He had a plan. He always had a plan. They took the private elevator down to the garage. A convoy of 3 black SUVs was waiting. Marco was driving the lead car. Leo was driving the rear car. Nico guided Emma into the middle vehicle, a heavy, armored beast of a machine. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. His grip was tight. "We are just going for a drive," he said, sensing her nervousness. "An hour into the country. It will be quiet." "Okay," Emma nodded. The convoy rolled out of the garage and into the morning traffic of Riverton. For 20 minutes, everything was normal. Nico was relaxed, his thumb sweeping over Emma's knuckles. They talked about the house. It had a garden. He told her. She could plant tomatoes if she wanted. They entered the tunnel that ran beneath the river, and the orange sodium lights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. Traffic was light, then suddenly it wasn't. A sanitation truck swerved from the opposite lane, jackknifing across the road, blocking the exit of the tunnel. Marco slammed on the brakes in the lead car. Tires screeched, the sound echoing deafeningly off the concrete walls. Nico's head snapped up. His hand dropped hers and went instantly to his holster. "Get down," he shouted, shoving Emma's head toward her knees. Behind them, the rear SUV, the one Leo was driving, didn't brake. It accelerated. It slammed into the back of their car with a bone-jarring crash. Emma screamed as she was thrown forward, the seatbelt biting into her shoulder. The world spun. Glass shattered. Nico was shouting orders, but the radio was dead. "Ambush!" he roared. Doors flew open. Gunfire erupted loud, thundering cracks that filled the enclosed space of the tunnel. Nico pushed Emma down onto the floorboard. "Stay down. Do not move." He kicked his door open and returned fire. Using the heavy door as a shield, Emma curled into a ball, covering her ears, sobbing. She could hear shouting, the ping of bullets against the armored plating, the smell of burning rubber and cordite. Then, the door on her side of the car was ripped open. She looked up, expecting to see Marco. It was Leo. He wasn't holding a gun to defend her. He was reaching for her. "Come on," Leo shouted, grabbing her arm. Emma scrambled back. "Nico!" she screamed. Nico turned, his eyes widening in horror as he saw Leo dragging her out. "Leo!" Nico roared, raising his weapon, but a spray of bullets from the blocking truck forced him back behind cover. He was pinned. "No!" Emma shrieked, kicking and clawing as Leo hauled her out of the car. Another van screeched to a halt beside them. The side door slid open. 2 men wearing ski masks jumped out. They grabbed Emma. She fought with everything she had, biting, scratching, screaming Nico's name until her throat tore. Nico broke cover. He didn't care about the bullets. He ran around the hood of the car, firing wildly, dropping one of the masked men. "Emma!" he shouted. A sound of pure, agonizing desperation. He was 10 feet away. He was 5 feet away. Leo shoved Emma into the van. The door slammed shut. Nico lunged, his hand brushing the handle of the van just as it peeled away, tires smoking. "No!" The scream echoed in the tunnel, louder than the gunshots, louder than the sirens that were beginning to wail in the distance. Nico stood in the middle of the road, his chest heaving, his gun hanging uselessly at his side, watching the taillights of the van disappear into the darkness. He had promised to find her, and now, for the first time in his life, Nico DeLuca truly had nothing left to lose. The silence in the tunnel was louder than the gunfire had been. Nico DeLuca stood amidst the wreckage of the ambush, the smell of burnt rubber and spent shell casings hanging heavy in the stagnant air. His chest heaved, but his face had gone slack, drained of all color and expression. He stared at the spot where the van had disappeared, his mind replaying the image of Emma's terrified face, her hand reaching for him, the door slamming shut. Marco was shouting orders into a radio, calling for backup, calling for medics for the wounded men in the rear car. Nico did not hear him. For 10 years, Nico had operated with a cold, mathematical precision. Emotions were variables to be eliminated. Fear was a weakness to be exploited. But as he stood there, realizing that Emma, the woman who had put her hands on his wound, who had laughed in his kitchen, who had slept against his chest, was in the hands of the Valentis, the math broke. The restraint snapped. Nico turned to Marco. His eyes were not human. They were black pits of absolute, terrifying focus. "Find them," Nico said. The voice did not sound like his own. It sounded like grinding metal. "We are trying, boss," Marco said, looking at Nico with genuine fear. "We are scrubbing the city cameras. We will find the van." "I do not want you to try," Nico said, walking past him toward the one operational SUV. "I want you to burn this city until they have nowhere left to hide. Wake up the judges. Wake up the precinct captains. Call in every favor, every debt, every marker. If a leaf falls in Riverton today, I want to know where it lands." He got into the driver's seat. He didn't wait for a bodyguard. He slammed the door and floored the accelerator, the engine roaring like a wounded beast. He was not going back to the penthouse. He was going to the streets, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The warehouse smelled of brine, old rust, and damp rot. It was located in the derelict shipyard district, a graveyard of industry where the city dumped what it wanted to forget. Emma Hale sat on a wooden chair in the center of a cavernous, dimly lit room. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic biting into her skin. Her cheek throbbed where she had been struck during the struggle in the van, and her knee was scraped raw. She was terrified. The fear was a cold, slick thing in her stomach, threatening to make her sick. 3 men were playing cards at a folding table near the rolling metal door. They were laughing, drinking beer, their guns resting casually on the table. They weren't looking at her. To them, she wasn't a person. She was a bargaining chip. She was a piece of meat to be traded for territory. Emma closed her eyes, trying to control her breathing. If she panicked, she would fall apart. If she fell apart, she died. She forced herself to think of Nico, not the terrifying figure the world saw, but the man who had clumsily chopped garlic in her kitchen, the man who had held her through her nightmares. "Run if you want, but I will find you." He had said it at the river, his voice broken and honest. At the time, it had frightened her. Now, in this dark, cold hell, those words were a lifeline. They were a promise. "He is coming," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. "He is coming." One of the men at the table looked up. "You say something, sweetheart?" Emma lifted her chin. She stared at him, channeling every ounce of the strength she had learned from dealing with difficult patients, tired doctors, and a life of struggle. "I said you should enjoy that beer," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "because when he finds you, you are not going to have time to finish it." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound, but he stopped drinking, and he checked the safety on his gun. Nico found Leo in a safe house 3 miles from the tunnel. Nico's men had tracked Leo's burner phone. When Nico kicked the door in, Leo was packing a bag, sweating, looking like a rat cornered in a trap. Leo went for his gun. He was not fast enough. Nico moved with a blur of violence, crossing the room and pinning Leo against the wall by his throat. Nico didn't yell. He didn't strike him. He just squeezed, staring into the younger man's eyes with a look of such profound betrayal that Leo started to sob. Why? Nico asked softly. "They have my sister," Leo choked out, tears streaming down his face. "The Valentis. They said they would kill her. I had no choice. Boss, I swear." Nico's grip tightened. "There is always a choice. You chose to sell the only innocent person in this entire war." Leo squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the bullet, waiting for the end. But Nico released him. Leo slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Nico stood over him, adjusting his cuffs. He looked down at the traitor, his mind working furiously. Killing Leo would satisfy his rage, but it would not save Emma. He needed an edge. "Pick up the phone," Nico ordered. Leo looked up, confused. "What?" "Call your contact at the Valentis," Nico said, his voice hard as flint. "You are going to tell them that the ambush worked perfectly. You are going to tell them that I am dead, that you saw my body in the tunnel." Leo stared at him. "They won't believe it." "They will if you sound terrified enough," Nico said. "Tell them the police are swarming the tunnel and you are running. Tell them my organization is in chaos. Tell them to relax their guard because the war is over." Leo's hands shook as he reached for his phone. "Do this right," Nico said, leaning down, "and you might live long enough to apologize to her." The sun had set, plunging the shipyard into deep shadow. The warehouse was quiet. The ruse had worked. The Valenti guards were relaxed, celebrating the news that Nico DeLuca was dead. They had reduced their perimeter security, confident that no rescue was coming from a headless snake. They were wrong. Nico moved through the shadows of the shipping containers like a ghost. He had a team of 4 men with him, Marco and 3 of his most trusted veterans. They wore tactical gear. Moving silently on the cracked pavement, Nico signaled the breach. The metal side door of the warehouse exploded inward with a deafening crash. Flashbangs detonated, filling the cavernous space with blinding white light and a high-pitched ringing. Nico was the first one through the door. He didn't fire wildly. He picked his targets. The man at the table who had laughed at Emma went down before he could reach his weapon. Chaos erupted. Emma, blinded by the light and deafened by the noise, screamed. She felt her chair tip over as one of the guards scrambled backward, knocking into her. She hit the concrete floor hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The zip ties dug into her wrists. Gunfire echoed around her, loud, cracking sounds that sparked off the metal pillars. "Stay down," she told herself. She kicked her legs, struggling to move. She couldn't stay in the open. She managed to roll, dragging the chair with her, inching toward a stack of wooden crates. Bullets chewed up the floor where she had been seconds before. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her face into the dirty concrete, praying. Suddenly, the firing stopped near her. She heard heavy boots. Someone grabbed the back of her chair and hauled her upright. She opened her eyes, expecting to see Nico. Instead, she looked into the wild, panicked eyes of the last Valenti gunman. He was young, terrified, and desperate. He grabbed her by the hair, hauling her up, and jammed the barrel of his pistol against her temple. "Back off," the gunman screamed, his voice cracking. "Back off or I paint the wall with her." The warehouse went silent. Nico stepped out from behind a pillar 20 feet away. He froze. His gun was raised, leveled at the man's head, but he couldn't take the shot. The gunman was using Emma as a human shield. Her face was pale, streaked with grime and tears, her eyes locked on Nico's. "Put the gun down," Nico said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. "Get back," the gunman shrieked, pressing the barrel harder against Emma's skin. "I mean it, I will kill her." Nico lowered his weapon slowly. He held up his other hand, palm open. "Okay," Nico said. "Look, I am putting it down." He slowly bent his knees, placing his gun on the floor. He stood up, his hands empty. "Just let her go," Nico said, taking a slow step forward. "You can walk out of here. Nobody follows you. Just leave the girl." "You are lying," the gunman spat. "You are Nico DeLuca. You don't let anyone walk." The gunman's eyes darted to the side for a fraction of a second, looking for an exit. In that millisecond of distraction, Nico moved. He didn't run. He launched himself. He covered the distance with explosive speed, a blur of motion. The gunman saw him and jerked the trigger. Emma screamed and threw her weight backward, knocking the gunman off balance. The gun went off. The bullet went wide, shattering a window high above. Nico collided with the gunman. The impact was violent, sending them both crashing into a stack of pallets. Wood splintered. The gun skittered across the floor. They rolled, grappling. The gunman was desperate, clawing at Nico's face, but Nico was possessed. He didn't feel pain. He didn't feel exhaustion. He only felt the need to end the threat. Nico landed a heavy blow to the man's jaw, then another. The gunman went limp. Nico shoved him away, scrambling to his feet, his chest heaving. He ignored the blood dripping from a cut above his eye. He turned to Emma. She was huddled by the crates, still tied to the chair, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Nico fell to his knees in front of her. He pulled a knife from his belt and sliced the zip ties in one smooth motion. Emma's arms fell free. She gasped, the rush of blood to her hands painful. Nico holstered the knife and reached for her. "Emma!" He breathed. She launched herself at him. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing, her hands gripping his tactical vest. Nico wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him, rocking her back and forth. "I got you," he whispered fiercely into her hair. "I got you. I told you I would find you." Sirens began to wail in the distance, dozens of them, getting louder. Nico pulled back slightly. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away the dirt and tears. He scanned her frantically. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Just bruises," Emma stammered. She looked at him. There was blood on his white shirt, blood on his face. Panic flared in her eyes. She reached out, her trembling fingers touching his chest. "You are bleeding," she cried. "Nico, you are bleeding. It is not mine," he assured her quickly. He caught her hands. He saw her knuckles, scraped raw from her struggle on the concrete floor. His expression crumpled. He lifted her hands to his lips. He kissed the scraped skin. His eyes closed, his touch incredibly tender. It was a gesture of reverence, an apology for every scratch, every bruise, every moment of fear she had endured because of him. "We have to go," Marco said, appearing beside them. "The cops are 2 minutes out. The anonymous tip worked. They are coming to clean up the trash." Nico nodded. He stood up, pulling Emma with him. He didn't let go of her hand. "Let's go home," he said. They didn't go back to the penthouse. They drove to the docks, to a quiet spot between towering shipping containers where the police lights were just flickering reflections on the water. The adrenaline had faded, leaving them both hollowed out and exhausted. Emma leaned against the side of the SUV, hugging herself against the cool night air. Nico stood in front of her, stripping off his ruined tactical vest and tossing it into the trunk. He was left in his blood-stained shirt, looking like a fallen angel. "I can't do this." "Nico," Emma said softly. Nico went still. He turned to look at her. "I know," he said. "No." Emma shook her head, tears welling up again. I can't live waiting for the next bullet. I can't live wondering if you are going to come home or if I'm going to be dragged into a van. I am just a normal person. I am not built for this." Nico looked at the ground. He nodded slowly. "I know. Emma, I never should have dragged you into it. I will. I will set you up somewhere safe, far away. I will make sure you never have to look over your shoulder again." Emma let out a ragged sob. "That is the problem," she cried. "The thought of leaving you, it hurts worse than the fear. It hurts worse than the zip ties. I don't want to leave you, but I can't stay in this war." She looked at him, pleading for an answer that didn't exist. Nico stared at her. He looked at the woman who had saved his life, who had humanized him, who had just walked through fire and still wanted to be with him. He realized then that the war didn't matter. The territory didn't matter. The legacy of the DeLuca name was just ash in his mouth compared to the way she looked at him. "Then there is no war," Nico said. Emma blinked. "What? I am done," Nico said. His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of a mountain. "I am done. Emma, I am dismantling it. The drugs, the guns, the territory disputes. I am shutting it down. You can't just—" "Stop," Emma whispered. "You said it was impossible. You said you would lose everything." "I will lose the power," Nico admitted. "I will lose the fear people have of me. I will lose half my money and all of my status. I will probably spend the next 2 years in court battles and plea deals. He stepped closer to her, invading her space, wrapping her in his warmth. "But if I keep the crown, I lose you," he said, "and that is a price I cannot pay." He reached out and pulled her into his arms. It wasn't possessive this time. It was an anchor. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting out to sea. Emma curled her fingers into his hair, pulling his head down. "Are you sure?" she whispered against his lips. Nico didn't answer with words. He kissed her. It was a powerful kiss, deep and overwhelming, but it wasn't about heat. It was about relief. It was the taste of surrender. It was a vow made in the shadows of the docks, a promise to burn down his empire so he could build a home for her in the ashes. They stood there for a long time, the police sirens wailing in the distance, holding onto each other as the world burned down and a new one began. 6 months later, the townhouse was modest. It sat on the edge of Riverton, in a neighborhood where the lawns were small but neat, and neighbors waved to each other. Emma Hale walked up the steps, her feet aching from a 12-hour shift at the pediatric clinic. She was tired, but it was a good tired. It was the tired of honest work, not the exhaustion of looking over her shoulder. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled of oregano and roasting chicken. "I told you I was going to be late," she called out, dropping her bag on the bench. "You didn't have to cook." Nico appeared in the hallway. He looked different. The sharp, predatory edge was gone, replaced by a quieter strength. He was wearing jeans and a simple gray sweater, sleeves pushed up. He looked like a man who slept at night. Some people whispered that Nico DeLuca had gone soft. They said the wolf of Riverton had been declawed. Nico didn't care. He had traded his claws for this. He walked over to her, wiping his hands on a towel. "I wanted to cook," he said. "How was the clinic?" "Busy." Emma smiled, leaning into him as he wrapped his arms around her. "We had a flu outbreak. I gave 20 shots today." "My hero," he teased gently. He pressed her back against the door, just for a moment, and kissed her. It was quick, but it stole her breath. It was a reminder that while the danger was gone, the passion that had forged them in the fire was very much alive. Emma rested her head on his chest, her hand flattening over his heart. It beat steady and strong. "Come on," he said, pulling back. "Dinner is ready, and I promise I did not burn the garlic this time." Later that evening, after the dishes were done, they stood on the tiny back porch. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves. They looked out over the neighborhood lights. It was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. A car drove by slowly. Emma leaned against the railing, sipping her tea. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. Nico looked at her. "Miss what? The power, the fear, any of it?" He looked out at the dark yard. "Sometimes," he admitted, "it is hard to learn to be quiet when you have spent your whole life shouting. But then I look at you. I look at this house, and I remember what it felt like to stand in that tunnel and watch that van drive away." He turned to her, resting his hand on her cheek. "No, Emma, I don't miss it." Emma smiled, but there was a flicker of shadow in her eyes. She covered his hand with hers. "I am still scared sometimes," she confessed softly. "I wake up and I think I hear breaking glass. I think they are coming back." Nico moved closer. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. He held her tight, a shield against the ghosts of their past. "You can run if you need to," he whispered, the old words taking on a new, gentle meaning. Emma turned in his arms to face him. She looked up into the dark eyes that had once terrified her and now held her entire world. "And what will you do?" she asked. Nico smiled, a faint, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I will find you," he promised. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a possessive vow. It was a simple fact. No matter how hard the road got, no matter what demons came for them, he would always choose her. He would always come back. Emma rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, sealing the promise under the quiet stars of Riverton. She was finally home. Thank you so much for listening to the finale of Run If You Want, But I'll Find You. It has been an incredible journey with Nico and Emma. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did Nico make the right choice leaving the life behind? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing our community grow around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new series. We have many more passionate, emotional stories coming your way. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next story.